Okay, welcome to lecture 5.3. Okay, first, so this is the Krehbiel-Rivers paper. Um, by the way, a little history from this. Within kind of the political economy literature, the public choice school, Rochester School of Political Economy, we'd often talk about ideal points and sometimes a spatial model of voting. And up until Krehbiel-Rivers, really no one had ever. We would talk theoretically about here's the ideal point, but we never actually estimated what is this legislator's ideal point. And this was the first one. This was, as far as I'm aware, Krehbiel and Rivers said we're going to actually estimate some ideal points for these senators. And so, just to review, so recall that xi equals Senator I's ideal point. Okay, this is the latent variable. So the notation may be a little bit confusing. Usually we use a yi star. Okay, Krehbiel and Rivers are going to use xi, and usually we use xi to indicate an independent variable, that data that we see. This is not observed. Xi is not observed. So it's the latent variable. Xi, and then we're going to assume that xi equals zi, a vector of independent variables, zi times a vector of parameters, gamma, plus epsilon I, where epsilon I distributed normal 0 sigma squared. Okay, so remember this. Okay, in the normal probit, we would have to set sigma equal to 1. Here, I'm going to foreshadow. In this case, there's going to be something special about this, where we won't have to do that in this. There's a kind of special aspect of this, why we don't. And I'll talk about it later, but keep that in mind. We're actually going to come up with an estimate of sigma squared in this case. Also, we're going to come up with an estimate of gamma, the vector of parameters for there's like 5 or so independent variables for each legislator. By the way, it's Senate, so there's it's supposed to be 100, but I think only like 96 showed up to vote that day, so there's going to be 96 values of zi, and later we're going to estimate the predicted value, the predicted ideal point of, even though we don't observe I, because we don't observe that that error term, we can get a prediction of what the most likely value, and we'll just define it as zi, the independent variables for I times gamma hat. Okay, so that's another place where we're going. Next, we'll say that on issue J, so we're going to have these roll call votes where it's going to be like we're pitting one bill against another, and these bills are going to be indicated by theta J, and they're going to be an actual value of the minimum wage. So if I remember right, so I think one is 3.05, another 3.15, one 2 I didn't get that right. Somewhere around, this was I think like early 80s, so minimum wage was much less. So I think the status quo was in the high $2 amount, and they're gonna talking about raising it to something in the low $3 amount. So those are values of theta J that we're going to talk about. Okay. Oh, that's where we're okay. Here, actually, I have this. So, okay, next. So that is a kind of review of remember the last session. I gave you a segment of a taste of the Krehbiel-Rivers paper. So review that if you have to. Next, for this segment, I want to explain some more like the political economy involved of it, and this lecture is going to be more like a congressional lecture rather than an econometric lecture. Um, Here is how um, Krehbiel and Rivers discuss how they get the votes. Okay, here's what the votes mean by these senators. Okay, first of all, at the time, status quo. Actually, this isn't that important, but the status quo was 230 an hour. Um, there was a bill, and I'm just going to put a question mark. Really, Krehbiel and Rivers don't even discuss the bill. They just say that the bill required indexing the minimum wage to inflation. Okay. It's really never happened in history. There's been times where they've had like transition minimum wages, but they've never done this in the U.S. Said the minimum wage is going to be tied to whatever the consumer price index is. No one's ever done that. So Krehbiel and Rivers note that the chair and the ranking minority member of the Labor Committee both seem to oppose this indexing the minimum wage to inflation. Okay. By the way, so a chair is usually the committee's leader from the majority party. The ranking minority member is the committee's leader from the minority party. But when they agree on something, you realize that if they both oppose something, he said that is not going to pass. Okay. So you kind of knew that the bill was not going to pass because they just didn't like that indexing provision. Okay. So Krehbiel and Rivers said really the only game in town were these three amendments, and one was called the Williams Javits Amendment. And this, they label Theta 3, and this was, they said that in 1980, so there, okay, I have my notes when this was passed, that that the minimum wage, I may have this wrong, this might have been late 70s, and it might have been that 1980 was the date when this would take effect, but it's whatever the case. Theta 3 means that from 1980 on, minimum wage is going to be $3.15 an hour. Okay, next was the Tower Amendment. By the way, these are all senators, Williams, Javits, and Tower. And Tower, I think they were all on the Labor Committee. Tower's amendment was $3.05 an hour. I told you about we should get the units right. So it's not dollars, but it's dollars per hour. Okay. So Theta 2, that much. And then there's the Bartlett Amendment, and this was Krehbiel and Rivers labeled Theta 1, and that was $2.90 an hour. Okay. Okay. Now, sorry here. I guess you didn't see it. Okay. There's where we are. These are definitions. Theta 1, Theta 2, Theta 3. Okay. Now, Krehbiel and Rivers note that, okay, this is one of Krehbiel's expertise, areas of expertise. This is like scheduling issues. In the House, usually it's the Rules Committee that decides these things, what amendments are allowed, and so on. In the Senate, they have something called a unanimous consent agreement. So usually what happens is the majority party leader, minority party leader get together. They decide what amendments they're going to allow. If they can agree on something, one of them will go to the floor and say, I ask unanimous consent that this will be the agenda. So that's what happened in this bill. So under that, and if no one says I object, then that's exactly what the Senate does. Okay, that's beyond the scope of this course. But so that's some background. Given that unanimous consent agreement, this is the way things were going to be voted on. First, it'd be the bill versus Theta 1, that amendment. I can't even remember the name. What Theta 1 was, the Bartlett Amendment. Then whichever one would go to the second round and go against Theta 2. And that was the Tower Amendment. And then whichever won that round would go against Theta 3. And then the winner of that round would go against the status quo. Okay. Now, okay. Krehbiel and Rivers. Okay, so here's kind of what I want you to understand about this is that when they did their research and they looked for these votes, they wanted to have different votes of this minimum wage versus another, and it's more complicated than even what they expected. So what happened is, even though the bill is the bill versus Theta 1, Krehbiel and Rivers argued that really everyone understood that it's not really the bill versus Theta 1, because if the bill wins, what is it? If the bill wins, it would eventually be defeated by Theta 3. Okay, so they treat a vote for the bill, in this case, in this round, as if it's a vote for Theta 3. Okay. So that means that they treat the agenda as if it looked like this: Theta 3 versus Theta 1, and then the winner against Theta 2. Okay. So if you read this, you may think, if you want to be critical of them, if you're just looking for things to criticize, you'd say, oh, how do you know that? You don't. Empirical work gets messy. That's part of the point of this segment. And I give them a break. I think that it actually was what they assert that it was, that Krehbiel and Rivers assert that it was, that really the agenda was like this. Okay. But I want you to understand that once you do research, it's never as clean and simple as you think it's going to be. Some empirical work gets messy, and that's what happened here. Okay. So they assume, Krehbiel and Rivers, so we're going to assume it's as if the vote is like this. And they read speeches by these. It looked like that's what everyone kind of agreed, that the first vote revealed the preferences of Theta 3 versus Theta 1. Okay. Even with that, okay, there's some people within political economy, positive political theory, the people who do game theoretic models of politics are saying, well, look, what about sophisticated voting? Even if the agenda is like this, like you say, it's first Theta 3 versus Theta 1. So if the vote tree is like this, Theta 3 versus Theta 1, then the winner goes against Theta 2. Theta 1 versus Theta 2. He said, it's not clear you can treat these votes as revealing the preferences Theta 3 versus Theta 1, because it could be, for instance, what if all the senators realize that if you go down here, that if you go down to this part of the vote tree, theta 2 is going to defeat theta 1. And if everyone is sophisticated, everyone's going to solve the tree backwards, and they're going to realize, well, even though it looks like the first vote is theta 3 versus theta 1, everyone knows that theta 1 would lose to theta 2, so really a vote for theta 1 is a vote for theta 2. So it's kind of like the 2020 election. During the Democratic primary, it was Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders, or lots of people, lots of Democrats who are saying, look, even if you like Bernie Sanders the most, more than Joe Biden, it looks like Trump is going to defeat the socialist Bernie Sanders. Sanders can't win the general. So a vote for Sanders in the Democratic primary is really a vote for Trump. Okay. And they're saying, even if you really, really love Bernie Sanders, don't vote for him. Vote sophisticatedly. Vote for Biden, who could actually defeat Trump. Okay. Something like that is going on here. They're saying, look, theta 1 is like Bernie Sanders. If you vote for Bernie Sanders, you're going to get Trump, theta 2. Okay. Krehbiel and Rivers say, okay, maybe that's the case. What if it is? Okay. Now, and so that poses a problem to our theory. Okay. Now, and they say, no, we don't believe that. We believe that everyone voted sincerely, that each round they didn't do what I just described. And here is some evidence of why that might have been true. Okay. We know exactly, let me put in red, what actually happened. Okay. And on the first vote, theta 3 won. Okay. So that's, you just look at the data. That's what happened. Later, I'll give you, I think I'll have the actual vote totals. So theta 3 won. Okay. Next, in the second round, theta 3 defeated theta 2. Okay. That's what happened on the actual vote. So the theory is, if everyone is voting sophisticatedly, then the green indicates sophisticated votes, which means that really in this first round, not theta 3, sorry, theta 2. If everyone is voting sophisticatedly, everyone says, well, a vote for theta 1 is really a vote for theta 2. So in the first round, if everyone's voting sophisticatedly, it really reveals the preferences of theta 3 versus theta 2, not theta 3 versus theta 1. Okay? If that is true, if that sophisticated voting theory is what was going on, here's what should be the case. Notice that if that's true, then the first round reveals the preferences. Everyone just votes yay, even only if they prefer theta 3 over theta 2. Okay? But now in the second vote, the same thing must be true. We know that the actual vote was theta 3 versus theta 2, and whether they vote sincerely or sophisticatedly, it's the last round. They don't have to worry about sophisticated strategies. So that means in the second round, we know for certain that it revealed the preferences theta 3 versus theta 2. Okay, now, if your theory is that everyone's voting sophisticatedly, then the first round would be the exact same thing. It also would be revealing the preferences theta 3 versus theta 2. Which means that if that sophisticated voting theory is true, then the roll call vote in round 1 and round 2 should be exactly the same. Since according to the theory, both votes were theta 3 versus theta 2. Okay, it wasn't that way in practice. The votes differed in round 2 and round 1. Okay, so Krehbiel and Rivers correctly note that this falsifies at least the strong version of that sophisticated voting theory. It can't be the case that everyone voted sophisticatedly. Maybe some did and some didn't, okay? But whatever the case, it can't be the case that everyone voted sophisticatedly. Krehbiel-Rivers say, well, this is, it doesn't prove that everyone voted sincerely, that no one voted sophisticatedly, but maybe it's evidence that no one did. And we said, we're going to assume that's the case, that no one voted sophisticatedly. I agree with them. I think that Krehbiel and Rivers make the good case. They convince me. And despite once again, empirical work gets messy, I give them a break. Okay. So what that means, most important, is they're saying that all of this, call it hand waving if you like, assumptions, what they're trying to do is justify an econometric method that says the first round reveals the preferences of all these legislators, of their preferences for theta 3 versus theta 1. The second round reveals the preferences of theta 3 versus theta 2. Okay. All right. So that's where the assumptions go on. That was my little mini lecture on congressional politics. Okay. I think Krehbiel and Rivers did they are right in that. Okay. So that, I'm going to end this segment here. And then in the next segment, I want to say, what if that is true? That we now have two roll call votes, and each one, it reveals the preferences. The first case, theta 1 versus theta 3. Second case, theta 2 versus theta 3. Okay, we'll discuss what we do with that to build a likelihood function. I'll do that in the next segment. Okay, see you there.